You're listening to Dots, Lines, and Destinations, a travel podcast with hosts Stephen Seagraves, Fosma Moon, and Seth Miller. Hello, and welcome to episode 339 of Dots, Lines, and Destinations. I'm Stephen Seagraves, joined this week by Seth Miller. How you doing, Seth?
It's a whole neo world. I'm really sad I didn't get to crack a joke about on episode 337, I forgot to mention it's my favorite aircraft type. What? You don't like the 330-700?
I don't know what it is.
The Super Guppy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The A337 is the ICAO code, or 337 is the IATA code for the Super Guppy XL, whatever the new Airbus transport planes.
Interesting. I had no idea.
It's not a Super Guppy, though, right? That was the old Boeing one. But
yeah, the Super Guppy.
Yeah, but it's the... Now I got to look up what it's actually called. It's the XL, whatever. That's its code. So, yeah, it's a fun, random A330 trivia fact. But
you're staying cool there in the Northeast?
I am. It's the Beluga XL. Sorry.
The Beluga.
That's right. Not a Guppy. It's a Beluga, the big thing. And they paint fun faces on them. I am desperately trying to stay cool in the Northeast. We got up above 90 again this weekend, and that was not good. I didn't realize it was going to be this hot, and as I was coming home from St. Martin, my dad texted me to remind me to be warmer when I landed than when I departed, and that pretty much threw off my entire return trip. Oh, thanks, Dad. He actually listens to this sometimes, so he might hear that. That'll be awkward. But yeah, I know. When I left, the weather forecast was great. That's not anymore. But how you doing? It's hot out there too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in the mid-90s, high 90s. Yeah. But we'll talk about your St. Martin trip. We'll talk about that last. But first, some fun news. I guess good news. The MAX 10 made its first flight.
Yes.
This was over the weekend.
Exciting. It is. I'm very happy to see that finally happen. I think it's a good sign for Boeing. It's a good sign for Boeing's airline customers. There's a little caveat to the celebration in that it seems like Boeing is going to pursue sort of not full recertification, but when the other Maxin went back into service, there was a discrepancy between what the FAA wanted and what EASA and some other regulators wanted. And so like the EASA rules make it have additional limitations on, I think there's some navigational things, like how it operates in certain areas, that when flying it in Europe, that the MAX is actually not certified to do, where in the US they're allowed to do it. And EASA wanted additional sort of design work and testing that happen, and Boeing has said it will integrate all of that testing into the 10 so that from initial certification it will be ready with EASA as well. And they now say that that's probably going to slow down the entry into service process, and they don't expect deliveries until 2023 at the earliest, and possibly slipping a little from that. So it's still a couple years away.
Wow. I mean, so that certification then will take the place of, it'll basically fill the certificate for the other Maxes.
Well,
is that what they're saying? That's kind of how
I don't think so, right? I mean, maybe some of the design work will then be retrofit onto the other types or whatnot, right? Like if it's all software, then it's somewhat easy to just retrofit it on. It's also like, remember the MAX 10 is a little different. It has that articulating landing gear and some other things because of the engines that like it is. Never mind that all the 737s, have always been the same for 50 years. And this one is, in fact, a little different. Yeah. Even from the basic stuff. So, but yeah, it needed taller landing gear. And so they had to figure out a way to articulate it while still getting it to fit into the same, cavity under the fuselage.
Yep.
So,
interesting.
There. But yeah, I mean, good news that it's coming along. Taking this long, the airlines that have committed to it, we know United wants to take it. We talked about this a little bit last week in terms of, using it to replace the PS plane, and not now knowing that they're going to have to keep the 75s, or the high J 763s, if those routes really come back a big way, flying domestically rather than they don't have the high J 752s.
Yeah. Yeah, which is interesting because we, between some group of friends, we were talking about that from United. We've seen that some of those planes, the high density J 752s, are still listed as active. And
absolutely, so United kept them in the OAG or in the schedule filings, but has announced that they are retired. It's a super weird, and every couple of months they change the schedule and cancel them out a little further. I haven't seen if they're continuing to add them further out, and maybe it's just over time they'll finally get removed. I should go look at that. But they absolutely have added. They do still exist in the schedule on the Newark to San Francisco and Los Angeles routes. If you look far enough out, it's bizarre.
Yeah, and is there other U.S. carriers that are going for the MAX 10?
Could use a producer. You know what I'm saying? I don't. We'll see how fast Google can tell me. I'm not sure who else has ordered the 10. To be honest, I don't think so because it would be Right? It would only be American or United.
And,
or Delta, and Delta definitely did. No, there actually aren't a lot. Copa has some on order. Fly Dubai has some on order. Lion Air, Malaysia Airlines, TUI, United, Vietjet, Virgin Australia, and WestJet would like some. In North America, will Virgin Australia take theirs? Who knows? Right? That was pre-bankruptcy order, and I don't know if they disposed of that or not. Vietjet in Southeast Asia, you can never know. I mean, they also got 120 MAX 8s on order, so that's a lot of planes. But they fly an insane number of routes and frequent down there. So
it's fascinating. I watched some of the video that was taken of it. It's a pretty plane. It looks a little different than a regular 737, but it's just slightly.
Yes, I'm sure it will show up somewhere I'm flying eventually. If I get an opportunity to be on it, like an inaugural something, I might go a little out of my way to get there, but that's because I like fun planes. But I like fun events about planes. I'm not sure that it'll be that different inside, but I like the fun events.
And then let's talk a little bit about American. They announced some preemptive cancellation for the next.
Well, there were the postemptive and then the preemptive.
There was some that canceled. They canceled some this past weekend, and then they've announced that they'll be canceling more flights.
Yeah, removing a couple hundred sort of from the schedule. It's less than 1% of the total schedule that they're pulling back on, but. I mean, the long and the short of it is they ran out of pilots, and you can't hire and train an onboard pilot that quickly if they're furloughed and lose their currency. I should say to be current, not money. They can't fly, and so getting them back into and getting trained up, it takes time, and there's still a lot of limitations around operating some of those facilities, so they fell behind.
Yeah. Is there any...
there was an interesting point raised, and I don't entirely agree with the premise, but was the point of the CARES Act and then the follow-on funding that, intended to keep all these people employed, was the point of that to keep the airlines in a sort of go mode, ready to fly back at normal schedules at a moment's notice? Or was it to simply keep people off the unemployment rolls and keep them with health insurance? And I believe the latter was far more the case, regardless of what was said. But I could sort of see it both ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the flight attendants, right? They're able to get them back from furlough pretty quickly,
and they can train up a little faster.
Yeah, I mean, Scott Kirby from United had a Axios HBO the other day.
Yeah,
and he said, they're worried about the growing pilot shortage. United has that program too, right, where they're pilots as well, like doing the whole schooling and getting them ready and all that.
Yeah, they've got a partnership with a flight training school where you sort of start up, do your thing, and then do your initial training, but then you have to build hours sort of separately. And then after you built your hours, you're guaranteed the interview, essentially. So you're not guaranteed the job, but you're guaranteed the interview.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big problem. How quickly can American cover from that?
Well, I mean, I think they made the smart choice in terms of scaling back what they're trying to do to make the recovery happen faster. I mean, right? Like the difference between this and Southwest, two computer network outages last week that caused a bunch of delays. And, when pilots or when crew get out of place and when planes are out of place, it can take, 12 to 48 hours to recover and get back on, back to normal. And that's about, I think Southwest was fully done after 48 hours, but the last day was only 20 or 30 cancellations kind of thing. American was still rolling through cancellations. It really depends on how quickly they can get stuff out of the schedule and consolidate and rebook people.
Yeah, and I think
the big challenge is the big challenge is the reaccommodation, right? They've been running load factors mid to upper 80% lately, system-wide. That does not leave a lot of room for slack.
Yeah, I had read that they were trying to cancel for they had already for those. So that's they were trying to do that, but I mean, there's only so many routes with multiple flights with availability.
Yeah, so always hard.
Crazy. And then some let's just talk COVID news. Germany's removed the quarantine for U.S. visitors are vaccinated.
Yes.
Does it also apply to those that test negative?
I believe so. I think anyone who either tests negative or comes in without fully vaccinated does not need to quarantine. Portugal, if I remember, also is opening up, as is the Netherlands. It's challenging though. The rules, even though the EU sort of officially said we want you all to reopen up to Americans, basically come let them spend some money here. Good Lord knows we need their tourism dollars for the summer. The biggest challenge is figuring out what all the rules are. And so some countries still require testing to, skip quarantine, even if you're vaccinated. Now some don't. You've talked about this a lot before, more the other direction of what happens if you get a false positive or even a real positive when you're away from home and get stuck somewhere. But it's, it's not easy to figure out what all those rules are. And, even just on my trip last week, there was a couple that didn't realize they were supposed to have paperwork and a special thing that you have to fill out on the St. Martin website. And it's mostly to sign up for their a mandatory COVID treatment/evacuation health insurance policy. But they wanted a copy of all your paperwork before they would approve you. And it went very quickly, and they, took your $30 per person insurance fees very seamlessly. But I was standing at the gate 30 minutes before rescheduled, already delayed departure because it was taking so long to check all the paperwork. And this couple's like, "What are you talking about? Mm-hmm. Here's our vaccination forms. What else do you need?" And they're like, "Here's our negative test." They knew they needed a negative test. I don't know if they were vaccinated or not. And by some miracle, they actually made it on the plane.
Wow.
They managed to get it all filled out, and I think it hadn't been approved in time, but the gate agent made a phone call and someone approved them getting on the plane, is how they explained it as they got on board and told everyone within earshot, and which was really like 5 rows worth because he talked really loud, what happened. I mean, obviously they were very excited to not have their vacation ruined, so I get it. But
yeah. What, isn't this something that Timatic is built for?
Yes. Which makes it really easy for airline employees and other people who know what Timatic is to use and verify things.
But shouldn't that be exposed, right, to the web at some level when people are booking tickets? It looks like you're going to Germany. That kind of thing, Clippy.
Don't get me wrong, the emails JetBlue sent had it listed multiple times. I was like, it wasn't in any of the emails. So I want to be like, dude, let me show you where. Mm-hmm. It could have been in bigger, bolder letters, maybe. I will grant that, but it was definitely in those emails. So, maybe they bought through an OTA and didn't get the emails directly from JetBlue and didn't get the information right. It's, again, with the tracking all of this stuff is not the easiest thing in the world. And so I do understand sort of the challenges there, but...
Yeah. Well, for example, I've gone and tried to find just some of the rules for parts of Europe, other certain countries, Asia, and... I end up, I think I understand the rules, and then I go look somewhere else, and it says something totally different.
Yeah, and part of that is, the internet is great, but stuff gets out of date.
Yeah. And people don't update things quickly, or,
Yeah, Timatic does, in fact, have, I'm looking at the Timatic entry for St. Martin right now, and passengers entering must have a negative test based on these rules, based on da-da-da. Interestingly... It now says, if you are vaccinated, you can enter with an antigen test. If you are not vaccinated, you need a PCR test. Although passengers arriving from the United States can enter on an antigen test even if they're not vaccinated.
It's like playing rules roulette. That right there should be simplified. Just make it simplified.
Yeah, and I will say Timatic has a note that says you have to fill out this form. At least 12 hours prior to departure and get your QR code and blah, blah, blah. So, Timatic is very good, and IATA did a great job extending that. I wish I knew what it stood for. I'm sure it's an acronym or something. But they did a very good job of sort of extending it and managing it to add this information in. But, I get it by looking at the United Airlines website that has a public version of it. There's very few places that expose it, and they don't advertise. It's like the passport requirements section of a website, of an airline website, and you got to know to go to look for it. And now it has these extra details. It's kind of hard to find sometimes.
Yeah. So. Frustrating. Because we're talking as kind of a group of people the fall to go to Europe, and restrictions are. Although I think it's on our list as well.
Well, that's the other thing, is how far out are you willing to plan, not knowing what's going to change?
Yeah.
I think I planned my trip to St. Martin maybe 4 weeks out. Maybe I started thinking about it 6 weeks out and bought the tickets 3 or 4 weeks out. And then I was pretty sure things weren't going to change, but also, my ticket, because they all are these days, was refundable, or at least flexible, and I'll go somewhere eventually. So, would I be booking non-refundable hotel rooms right now, anywhere? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to finish that thought, I've got a trip potentially to a conference in LA in October, and the weekend prior I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. So DCA to LAX, there's a bunch of options. There was actually a very affordable Alaska Airlines first class seat. It was $450 or something like that. And at that price, even though it's not a great first class experience, I need to work all day on Monday. That's actually not a bad price for an office. The upgrade price to get the additional space and whatnot isn't that bad.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking about it, but I didn't pull the trigger, because I still want to make sure I'm actually going to be in DC for the event the weekend prior, which I still don't know if it's really happening or not, and that this conference really is going to happen, even though they're, they're saying it with great, gusto. I don't want to be stuck sitting on a voucher for Alaska Airlines because they're so, not useless, but useless to me, right? The number of opportunities I have to fly them is very, very limited versus a JetBlue or a United or a Delta or an American voucher, which are the other options to make that trip. Yeah. JetBlue not as much out of UC, but right, like I want to sit on, even though I'm willing to sit on vouchers these days, I'd rather sit on them where I know I have a better chance of using them.
Yep, makes sense. Let's talk about BA and who's U2? Is that Ryanair? EasyJet.
No, Ryanair's FR.
Learn a new code every day. What are they doing? They're adding a lot of flights.
Domestic flying within the UK and Northern Ireland. Part of this is backfilling for Stobart Air collapse and the Aer Lingus Regional going away. Mm-hmm. But the reality is the UK hasn't figured out how it wants to allow its borders to reopen yet. And as a result, like they had this whole thing, right, where they green-lighted Portugal and then 2 weeks later made it amber, which requires additional quarantine again. And people had to scramble to get home and cancel and change tickets. Yeah. And, it's like, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, won't get fooled again, right?
Yeah.
People are hesitant to buy international tickets now. And I was at this conference I was at, there were a couple Brits that came over even with the quarantine requirement when they got home. And they said, like, you can't book a cottage in Scotland anymore. Like, every vacation property domestically is done. And even with that, like, they're adding all these domestic flights to get people moving around domestically because that's the only place where people are going to feel like it's worth the risk because, it's very unlikely to go into a full domestic lockdown. They haven't even done that of late while they keep extending limits on other countries.
Are these mostly for the summer? Just extend well into the fall and winter?
Well, I like to think of airline schedules as soft anything more than 6 weeks out. So I think some of them are likely to extend, but we'll have to see what, again, throw it at the wall and see what sticks and see what the bookings say.
Yeah.
But the route maps look great, man. There's some fun lines in there.
You gonna go do the quarantine just so you can get some?
I believe if I end up going in August and they haven't exempted the U.S. yet, I have a get out of quarantine free card with a work related. Because I have some meetings that I can take there. But
gotcha.
Otherwise, I'm flying to the UK on JetBlue and spending 3 days in a Heathrow hotel and then flying home, and that's a great trip. even though I got seat 1A on the return and get to try out that Mint Studio, I'm not sure it's worth 3 days in
in a hotel by yourself.
The Hilton with the great views at T2 or whatever it is. Like, none of that sounds.
I mean, you could have. Yeah, that sounds. Yeah. What about Eurowings? Eurowings Discover, which I didn't know was a thing.
Discover. So this is their new long haul operation that replaces. What was the Lufthansa one before? Not Cities. No, didn't they have a name for their long haul whatever?
That I know of.
The one that flew like all the 340, 300s.
I thought it was Eurowings.
No, I thought it was something else. Whatever. They're restarting again with 330s this time. And the first two, or not the first two, but two new destinations they announced amidst sort of pretty pessimistic, actually. So we're cutting a bunch of other things and shifting our operations report they put out last week. Victoria Falls and Halifax from Frankfurt.
Okay. Ocean is what it was going to be called.
Yeah, that's what it was like the code name or whatever. They operated. I got to go back and look. Yeah, it's a really interesting operation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the Victoria Falls, that's a sweet line.
Yeah, there's no one that's flying that, right? And it's a couple days a week. They're aimed at leisure traffic. They're going to tie into the Lufthansa connection at Frankfurt rather than... That was the other thing, is the old version of this was like non-hub operations. This time they're trying to put it in the hubs and see if it works.
Interesting.
But, yeah,
Halifax is a weird one. I mean, I guess for summer travel, maybe it makes sense.
Yeah, it's big in the summer.
But like, Canada's still closed.
Well, they're talking about next summer.
Okay. I misunderstood. Sorry. Next summer.
That's okay. And this is also like on top of cutting a bunch of other routes along the way and planes along the way. So
yeah.
But they want to compete with Condor basically, just a German charter vacation operator. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there'll be some other Caribbean market as well. Which
still has the coolest line that I haven't gotten.
You really want that Anchorage or
that one or Whitehorse?
Whitehorse. Isn't it a triangle?
It's a triangle one direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when they have enough loads, fly them both.
So. Yeah, the Whitehorse. It's like once a week, but hey, listen, you can get a couple hundred people.
Yep, exactly. Did you see this? So this was on CNN. Airbus quarantine tents for the Airbus fleet.
I did not see this yet. Now I have to look. Looking about it, are these like tiny like pods inside the plane?
Yeah, it's like an inflatable zip up type thing that you can keep people, quarantined. I wouldn't mind one of these for everyday travel.
I should say this is never gonna. Semi-transparent plastic sheeting that encircles a potentially infectious passenger in an isolation bubble. Yeah.
I'll take one of those.
I mean, my no, just no. Like anything that gets in the way of evacuating the aircraft is a non-starter, right? And so, it'll rip right down when when the plane crashes and you try to get out of your seat. I guess that makes it a little better, but no, just not happening.
Yeah.
Also, like, can you imagine, like, all the other passengers? So, like, you're gonna? No, they did it. They did it to win an award and get talked about. No, I'm not a fan.
I mean, I would take one. Put me in that. Just make it soundproof. It'd be great.
Yeah, it's gonna be louder. Your air vents are gonna echo around you, man.
No, that's true.
Also, that's actually the real issue I would have with it, especially with the large number of airlines that don't have gas bursts for individuals on board. If you might be in that like area without air circulation.
Oh man. So you're flying on Lufthansa, basically, where they turn the heat up the entire plane?
And then you'd be in a sauna. You'd be surrounded by plastic sheeting. It's going to hold the humidity in as you're sweating it out. Limited air circulation. You have an excuse to be the LH no pants guy.
It's your own little rainforest.
Yeah, on an airplane. I'm not. The reality is, what it really comes down to is like a year ago when no one knew what was going on. It was like, oh, we can redesign all the interiors of planes, and it's going to do this, it's going to do that. And it was like fun fodder to think about a little bit. And then very quickly we realized nothing is actually going to change. It's all so, like, I mean, it is what it is, but like to expect that anything else is a bad idea.
Yeah.
A recipe for being disappointed.
Yeah. I just thought the story was hilarious.
Yeah. Thanks.
Include it.
So Thank you for giving me a little jolt of. Are you?
Is that what you needed on this? So Delta is going to restart their South Africa.
They're restarting their Johannesburg flight. But do you remember, like a year ago, we talked about this? Sure, it was crazy. They wanted to do a triangle route and add Cape Town. And this was when they retired the 777-200LR, the 777LR. The A350-900 didn't quite have the same, so flying Johannesburg all the way back to Atlanta would be a little more challenging.
Yeah. And
they've since picked up a few higher max gross weight 350s, so they can have slightly more fuel in the tanks. Should be able to make it, but I mean they'll make it one way or another. It's a question of how many do they have to block or cargo do they have. But being able to do it out of Cape Town, where you're not at the like 5,000 feet of altitude of Johannesburg and hot and high, you got way better performance off the ground, and so it was going to work better.
Yeah.
And turns out the South African government does not want Delta to fly the triangle route and denied their application.
Did they say why?
No. Not that has been published in anything that I've seen. I basically got this. There's a DOT filing that the irony is that South African was in the midst of also applying for a renewal of its authorities to fly. And one of the way these routes, we call them, a tag flight or something like that, in the treaty, it is known as a co-terminal.
Okay.
So we usually talk about co-terminals as like two airports in the same city, and you can switch between them like if you need to change your ticket, you can move from LaGuardia to JFK or back or whatnot. And an airline usually does, or O'Hare and Midway. Something. In this case, the co-terminal in this context means that they can fly to one and then the other, and it's considered the same point, essentially. So from a regulatory perspective, they're allowed to fly, and the Chinese airlines actually did this, like Air China did this very early on in the pandemic. They flew Beijing to JFK, and then JFK to Dulles, overnighted there, or did a quick turn there, Dulles back to JFK, JFK back to Beijing. And they did the same thing with LA and San Francisco. Right, so the passengers can get to either of those cities. They have no local traffic rights. They're not carrying locally. And there's a couple of, but it was really interesting that they basically, South Africa, the government said, oh yeah, we don't actually think that's how coterminus really applies in this treaty that we both signed many years ago and have time. So we're very sorry, but Delta, you can't. And that ruling came down in late April, and last week Delta announced officially that it was dropping Cape Town, and everybody assumed, self-included, that it was because there's just no market for it. The reality is they can't. The government got in the way. So that came out in a filing on Monday morning. Pretty interesting.
So is United going to start back up at Cape Town?
It has the authority, and because it's a nonstop from the U.S., it's allowable. Right. The problem is in the triangle route. I mean,
the reason I ask is that kind of gives United kind of a leg. Delta fly between, if they start back on, they fly between Johannesburg, Newark, and Cape Town. So Interesting.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some advantage there. We'll see. Someone noted it's vaguely good news for the short-haul domestic carriers, but that's assuming someone's going to, separately go out of their way and buy a ticket on Mango or whoever's still flying down there to get down to Cape Town after flying in on Delta, rather than just flying like Emirates or TAR and connecting in the middle and going straight to Cape Town.
Yeah, I mean, how much time, do you save going straight to Johannesburg?
A lot.
I mean,
with the direct flight option that Delta was offering originally, a lot. Now it's harder to say.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of crazy that the South African government is kind of playing it that way. I could have swore that South Africa had a similar route on the U.S. side at one point.
So that's the other part of this is like there's a reciprocity thing. So the U.S. government denied South Africa's renewal, in part saying South African Airlines can't do the same thing, right? They can no longer do that amongst their 5 gateways, which are like LA, Atlanta, Philadelphia, New York, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And given that, but I can't remember when that operated. I just, I know they've operated both Dulles and JFK to South Africa, usually via Dakar.
Yep.
Which is one of the designated points in the bilateral treaty where they're allowed to go through. They're also allowed to go Cape Verde. Cabo Verde.
Can someone start an airline and just fly that route? So I get
the Cabo Verde.
Yeah.
I mean, just pre-pandemic, they have an airline. The country had hired Iceland to help them operate as a hub. I actually talked about that and we got out of the way to be a good to Europe, but it might work west of Africa.
That's what I'm saying. So someone start an airline so I can fly to South Africa.
It turns out that the overall aviation industry hit a few snags in the last few months.
No.
Yeah. It's off the podcast because they talk about it.
Oh, really?
It's App Talk on Flight Radar. Sorry. Which is a great podcast, but that's a whole different problem.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is either. Which I could have swore they did, but I off the top of my head, I cannot remember what hub was. If Foz was on, he remembered. He's got that memory for him.
About which?
About what was the route that South African flew? That's the he would.
Yeah, sorry,
but I can't remember.
So, do you think passengers who don't wear masks on board and fight with flight attendants should go to jail?
I mean, it's like any other altercation. Do most people who, have altercations with flight attendants go to jail?
No. Do most people who have altercations on ground go to jail?
Not really, no.
Right, it's an interesting, a bunch of airline employee unions and A4A, which is Airlines for America, which is a trade group representing the airlines, and a few other people all signed on to an open letter to the U.S. Attorney General begging them to start criminal prosecution of people who are, violate safety rules on board. And I'm
mixed on this. Like, I think if you assault someone, like you get in a fight, a physical altercation with someone, or not even, you don't have to hurt them, but you take a swing at a flight attendant, then yeah, I think you should probably go to jail. But if you don't want to wear a mask and you get hauled off the plane, no, I don't necessarily criminal offense.
What's interesting to me about this whole thing is, like, there was a statistic the other day that said, like, 2,500 or 25,000 probably, people had been referred to the DOT for violating rules. It was a crazy high number, and trying to figure that all out, and, how that was going to be, and as an example of how bad passenger behavior is these days. And then it countered with, you can see them, the FAA or DOT puts out a press release every time it issues another set of fines, and it does them 3 or 4 at a time, maybe 5. And you do the math on that, and like, okay, well, they put out a press release every 6 weeks announcing 5 more people have been fined $10,000. Great. In the meantime, that means another 250 people did something stupid, so we're prosecuting, and it's a civil penalty, and there's still negotiations and whatever. Fine. Fine isn't okay, not fine in money. Sorry, bad choice of words. But like, they're barely enforcing it as it is, even with all these fines they're handing out. Like, what's the difference? Would it make more sense just actually enforce it through financial penalty? I don't know.
Like, just enforce a fine and move on and not do the criminal behavior, criminal doing it.
Presumably the whole point of that is to make it clear to people that if you do something stupid, you risk having this very, very negative event, and so you won't do it. Now, I don't know if a $5,000 fine is a sufficient deterrent, if the risk of 6 months in jail at the federal level is a significant enough deterrent, right? Like, I'd like to think that people know not to be assholes, but I'd like to think that either of those is a good enough reason to not do something. The number of people that can afford either of them is probably pretty low, but like, I don't know. I'm torn on, like, yes, if you assault someone, it is a criminal offense. I get that.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure that having more people stuck in jail for being foolish is the best
use
of any resources.
I think so as well. I mean, I think pilots are sick of people being assaulted. I think that those numbers have grown, right, like recently.
Yeah.
But it's proven now that it's not drinking on airplanes necessarily causing a problem. I mean, they get drunk before they ever get on the airplane. But I think there's frustration in the airline industry on that side of.
Yeah, I will say that most of the cases that are getting the penalties do involve alcohol and not wearing a mask and often hitting a flight attendant.
Yeah. So. But I don't know that criminal penalty going to solve the problem. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, what are you going to get? Like a misdemeanor assault charge? Maybe a felony? Who knows? It would all depend. And I don't know that that's enough to keep people from doing that. Maybe money is the way to do it. Just make it very clear.
Yeah, well, right. But like that becomes a case of like you actually have to penalize more than like 5 people a month.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has to actually be a real risk, right? It's the same thing. At the beginning of the year, I had some data about your likelihood of seeing a civil penalty for trying to carry a gun through a checkpoint. Right? The TSA talks about how many guns they find and how if you do this, you're subject to local criminal prosecution because the gun rules are not federal in terms of possession at a secured checkpoint from a criminal perspective. It's a civil penalty potentially for doing it. And the assessment of the civil penalties like disappeared one day. It just stopped. It dropped to a tenth of what it was, and it wasn't that high to begin with. I'd have to go pull up my notes on that, but like it was really interesting, and I just don't know. All right, this is one of those challenges like, hey, if we have these rules and penalties, people will follow them, and then people realize that there's actually, even though the penalties are announced, they're not really enforced, and so it doesn't work. So maybe you should, be more strict about the penalty, right? The counterpoint is that you have like Singapore and you get caned for chewing gum, or spitting gum on the street, chewing it, I think maybe.
Or it's that and chewing gum on spitting on the street, also importing more than a certain number of packages of it. So. Oh boy, interesting stuff. Yeah. Let's talk about St. Martin.
Yeah.
So you were there in the Caribbean. No, but you just were there. You were there for how long? A week?
I was there for a week, days? Saturday to Saturday, because JetBlue only flies the nonstop Boston to St. Martin on Saturdays.
Yep.
And even that I think is only seasonal, but we'll see. It was last year. This year I think might stick around longer because a few places can go usually. It was. So as I alluded to earlier, there was a lot of chaos around paperwork at the airport in Boston trying to check everybody. Like, you know how they do have it from time to time on the gate display, like, these passengers, please come check in at the counter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually to get your passport checked.
Yep.
My submission of my passport through the app was accepted, so my name wasn't on the board. But apparently they made an announcement, and I didn't hear it because the gate area was pretty crowded. The flight was full going, like maybe one or two. So the gate area was pretty crowded. I was trying to stay out of the way, but apparently they made an announcement everybody needs to get your docs checked, which makes sense. They want to verify that you have your St. Martin health form, that you have your negative test, and all those other things. But they didn't do a good job of managing the line. And we were 45 minutes, an hour late pushing back. And like the pilot came out early on and was like, hey, I know we're scheduled to go out late right now. We're buttoned up and ready to go. The reason we're late is that we're waiting for one of the relief pilots. They actually fly a second set of pilots down because it's just a little too long for a turn.
Yeah.
So they fly a second set of pilots down deadhead, and the pilots work the flight back. So one of those guys was running late. And the pilot says, like, I've talked to the guy who's on his way. He'll be here at this time. If he's the last one on, that's perfect. Let's go. Let's get boarded. And 20 minutes later, he came back out, and he's like, why haven't you started boarding my plane yet? And they were still nowhere close to being done with checking all the documents. And they only had the 2 gate agents like normal. They were overwhelmed.
Yep.
And then when you go to board, they checked everything, not everything again, but like checked your passport again, checked that you had the docs checked again. If you hadn't had your docs checked yet because you didn't get in the first line, then the gate agent doing the boarding had to stop and do that because the other gate agent was still processing everybody on the other line. Like they were one body short to really make it all work.
So how did that work for you then? Because you said yours accepted. So was your paperwork like when you went up because you didn't go through the first line?
I realized that enough. When I realized how many people were in this other line,
mm-hmm.
I sort of eavesdropped in and was like, oh, I actually do need to do it, and so I just did.
Okay.
So I was okay, but only because I proactively was an obnoxious traveler and sort of stood in line with everybody else, but.
Yeah.
There were some creepy old guys on the plane. That was exciting.
Creepy old guys? You're going to have to give us some more information.
Couple young, relatively attractive college girls standing in line ready to go, and like multiple different people saying awkward things to them in the gate area and on board. Like one of the guys, as they're getting on board, is like, they're sitting and going to their seats, and he's like a row or two behind him, like in the boarding, just in the aisle. He's like, oh, it's you two again. You look following me or something? Ugh, I wish. And like not even that subtle about it. It was just like disgusting.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was that. The flight down, JetBlue barely served food on a good day and has scaled back since. So the flight down was a 10 a.m. departure that was supposed to land, or 10:30 that was supposed to land at 2:30, and we ended up being an hour late. So like lunch was a challenge. I got a sandwich. I brought stuff with me and got a sandwich at the terminal.
Yeah.
And then you arrive in St. Martin. It was hot, and their terminal still hasn't been rebuilt since Hurricane Irma. So they're dealing with a very temporary situation. They did a very good job handling it, but like the digital, here's my QR code that says I did all your paperwork.
Yeah.
They didn't check it. They looked at it, stamped it, and sent 1 out of every 10 people onto a secondary thing where someone else looked at it and sent you on. It was very interesting to me how little of that happened. Once we were on the island, everything was about sanitize your hands anytime you go into a building. Shops were pretty good about enforcing mask usage. Restaurants, admittedly, most of which are open air, so it matters less. Not so much. I found the emphasis on hand sanitation at this point in the pandemic, when we know it's not a surface transmissible disease, really, to be very interesting. I locked myself out of my hotel room one night. I just forgot my key card when I went down to the pool after the conference one night. And so I had to go back up to the front desk, and I'm in my bathing suit, and like they say, please don't come in wet. And I had a towel, and I dried off the best I could. And I go up to the front desk, and the security guard comes over and like, excuse me, so you have to put on a mask. I'm like, that's cool, but I'm locked out of my room. Like, if you have a mask you'd like to give me to wear, I'm happy to wear it. She's like, well, I can sell you one. And I looked at her and said, no, thank you. And I just stood there like, and I wrapped the towel around my face, like whatever. But yeah, it was just funny because normally they were giving them to people. Like most properties would give you one at places you went. If you needed one, they'd give you one, which
yeah.
Some of those states. But we sat down at dinner one night at just a random Captain's Rib Shack, which is actually very, very good in Sim Bay. And this woman comes over, absolutely hysterical waitress. Just great conversation, cracking jokes, whatever, the whole time. Turns out she's a bankruptcy attorney from Dallas who was in St. Martin on vacation and happened to go there her first night and like made friends with the owner and like was having fun. So she'd come back and every now and then work a shift as like a waitress because she was bored at night because she was there on her own.
Funny.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. So she was great. And then captain of Captain's Rib Shack is a pilot for Win Air. So there's actually an aviation related bit to it as well.
So it was a business dinner then, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, it was, honest with me and 4 guys from the conference, or 3 other guys from the conference talking idiocy. But yeah, the whole thing, it was, so like I said, like when you're there, there's subtle hints that there's still a pandemic going on globally, but it was relatively subtle and most people seem to not worry about it and not care. I don't know if that's the Caribbean life or they really didn't care or what. Yeah, it was interesting. And then coming home, the airport is too crowded. It doesn't have enough, space to process all the people who are trying to get out, especially on a Saturday, which is peak day there. That's I think they had 22 international, to the North America international flights on Saturday.
Yep.
Figure, 160 passengers each on average, 180, including an Air France 330, which is in 40. Like, it got real crowded, chaos levels. One of the guys was in my row on the flight down. I ran into him in the terminal on the way back. He's like, how you doing? He's like, yeah, I saw you walked in and went straight to the short line over there. Good on you. I have Mosaic, so they do have an elite line. He's like, we were stuck. We got here early because they said to get here 3 hours early. We were stuck outside for 2.5 hours waiting to get in the building in the heat, in the sun. So
wow. And
that's been a problem at St. Martin even without COVID. Just they haven't reached the airport fast enough.
Yep.
But as it's recovering, that is a big challenge. We were smart enough to stay in our rental car with heavy air conditioning as long as humanly possible, basically, before returning it and, hop it over to terminal and checking in. But even that, it was not great. We also, the resorts all have COVID testing at them now.
Oh, interesting. So that's how you did your testing on the way back?
That's how I did it for coming home. Like, you wait in line with the other 200 people at the resort who are also going home already on Saturday. And I was number 105, and I was halfway through them. So definitely a couple hundred people. Like, pay your $75, boom, boom, boom. It moved reasonably fast. I'd say it was 45 minutes start to finish.
Yeah.
From when I showed up to when I got through. So not the worst thing in the world. Maybe I'll bring a beer next time.
That would be. I would actually pay to see.
What, to be sitting in line drinking a beer?
Yeah, and they're like, sir, you're ready for your test. Okay, hang on a second.
I don't drink beer through my nose. I don't think it'll be a problem.
Man.
But yeah, it was fine, right? Like, and then coming up, except for the lines at both ends, and honestly, the chaos at the airports really makes me not want to travel as much right now. And this has been the same problem with everything, right? Like dealing with closed sessions, dealing with longer lines and understaffed and smaller spaces and all those other more crowded things. Like, none of that is fun. Being in St. Martin was great. I went scuba diving one day and I saw turtles and stingrays, and sharks, and eel, and all manner of fish. Like, that was a lot of fun. I remembered how to not die while underwater. It was really cool. So,
do you think it's to just that many people flying, or is it also just an infrastructure problem where the airport's ready for this yet?
Okay. It's both. It's in St. Martin's case. There's an infrastructure problem of the thing's not ready for anyone to be flying.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, all the paperwork related to the COVID stuff. Like, they staffed up as best they could and had people handing out papers, like you have to fill out an affidavit saying I have been tested and sign it, that the airline keeps to present to the CDC if necessary. And they, the airport staff handled that, right? So it wasn't airline staff. The airport staff were walking around with clipboards, handing those out, making sure everybody was filling them out. But they did their best. But when I filled that out, I still had to go to a counter, show that to someone along with my negative test and my passport so they could issue a boarding pass.
Mm-hmm.
And that process, even in the best of times, is 30 seconds, a minute per passenger. So and you're JetBlue and you've got a flight to Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, Newark, JFK, and Boston. 5 flights, 160 seats each. That's 800 seats you've got to process. Even with 5 counters running, that takes a lot of time. And they all depart within a 3-hour window.
Yeah.
So just the math. That's why the other guy was stuck outside for 2 hours. They called all the earlier flights, and Boston was the last flight.
Yeah.
And actually, Newark was an hour delayed also, but still mentioned. Anyway, you can see how you can understand why people are talking about digital health passports and vaccine passports and wanting to be able to scan a QR code and wave you to the next step.
Yep.
Right. Even if that's only 5 seconds per person, it's not 30. And the throughput on full planes, limited schedules, and all that other stuff, it really matters.
Yeah. Or you're going to be taking delays. You're going to be doing,
Yeah. I mean, so again, I really enjoyed traveling. There's also, for me, and we've talked about this a lot on the show, like I'm still not sure I'm entirely comfortable just going on vacation right now, knowing, especially in somewhere where there are a bunch of people who aren't vaccinated yet.
Yeah.
Right. And that there's some interesting risk profile stuff in my brain that I'm entirely clear on how to relax again yet. But I'd like to think I'm getting better. There were times during the trip where I truly was just happy and enjoying traveling again. For fleeting, but it did happen a couple times.
Well, that's nice.
Drinking my old Milwaukee on the boat way back from that was one of those moments. That was a good 4 hours, 5 hours. But right, it doesn't hold forever.
Yep. Just some late breaking news before we go to our Patreon subscriber. Yeah. Ed Russell, a friend of the show, Ed Russell, Twitter, posted a Delta memo from John Lauder, the EFO operations, saying they're going to hire 1,000 pilots. So
I don't know if they're going to get them.
Yeah, I don't either. But it sounds like all the airlines, the 3 majors in the U.S., are kind of going through
a lot of buyouts, and now you got to backfill.
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see how that works.
Yep. Just on our bonus episode, for those of you who are patrons, we're going to talk about La Campagna and CRJs. Are they underrated? If you'd like to subscribe, support us, and get that extra content, you go to Patreon and support us there. You can tweet us at @dotslines, more dots, more lines.com. And thanks for listening, and happy travels.
Take care.